Welcome to my channel on the best of fantasy. Today I am reviewing Ruin by John Gwynne. This is book 3 of The Faithful and the Fallen. And I will put a link in the description below to my reviews of books 1 and 2, Malice and Valor. And I will also put a link in the description below to the group discussions that I have been part of thus far on this series. So I hosted the first discussion on my channel on Malice, and I was joined by Alan from the Library of Alexandria, and Patrick Leo and Abby Salter. And later, when we had our discussion on book 2, Valor, on Alan's channel, Alex Nieves also joined us. So it's been just a blast having these discussions with my fellow booktubers about this series. It has absolutely added layers of understanding for me, and I think a lot of viewers have enjoyed those discussions as well. So that's been fun. And we're going to have another group discussion on Ruin, and it is going to be coming up probably around the end of this month, maybe early next month, but it will be on Abby Salter's channel. And we will finish this off by having another group discussion on the 4th book in the series, and that will be on Patrick Leo's channel, and that is going to be something special, I think. So that 4th discussion on Wrath. I hope that you guys are excited for that. I certainly am. Also, I should mention that there could be some spoilers for the first 2 books in this video on Malice and Valor, the first 2 books. Not in the beginning of my review. I'm going to talk in more general terms, but later in the video, I'm going to talk about the characters. And at that point, there could be some spoilers for books 1 and 2 for Malice and Valor, but not for Ruin. And I haven't read Wrath yet, so definitely no spoilers for that. So, my broad assessment of Ruin. If you enjoyed Malice and Valor, I think you're going to absolutely love Ruin. And there are several things I want to say in this regard. One is, actually, I think that this book is a step up from the first 2. I loved the first 2. They were a lot of fun. I enjoyed them immensely. But this book, Ruin, is a step up in several respects. Number one, the prose. The prose has always been accessible and great. But this time I found myself pausing more and more often to just admire a sentence. Now, I don't know why people get upset about prose sometimes. I hear the term prose snob. I don't know why it is that people focus on that particular aspect of storytelling, whereas, nobody talks about plot snobs, or, that sounds awful, plot snobs, or, character snobs, or whatever. Prose, it's important. It affects the reading experience, perhaps in ways that readers aren't even aware of. Gwynne has very accessible prose. In this book, Ruin, I found the prose to be beautiful in places, and I enjoyed that very much. I like pausing and going back to a sentence and saying, wow, that's really well done. So this is something that I appreciated more in Ruin than in the first 2 books. And another thing that I enjoyed even more in Ruin would be the variety that you have in here. So when I say variety, I'm talking about things like humor. There was always humor in the first 2 books, but I found myself laughing a little bit more in this one, perhaps because I'm more attached to the characters at this point. But there's also some nice, quiet, reflective moments in here. And not that they were entirely lacking in the first 2 books either, but I think there are more of them, and I like that. I appreciate those moments as a way to take a breath from the more action-oriented moments. And so I appreciated that Gwynne gave us those reflective moments in Ruin. And to me, they add depth to the book, and they add to my attachment to the characters. So well done there. Another way in which I feel that Ruin is just a step above the first 2 books would be the emotional moments. I found myself very moved in places here. There's some incredible moments. I don't want to get into detail because we're not doing spoilers here, but there are some moments in here that really gripped me and had a very strong emotional impact. So very well done, John Gwynne. Brilliant job. And finally, I would say, of course, the action battle stuff remains awesome. Gwynne is a very talented writer of action scenes of combat. There are all kinds. There's from the grand epic battles to the one-on-one combat. He does not shy away from describing things in a fairly graphic way as well, so that this feels real. This feels like he knows what he's talking about. And I know that he does some Viking reenactments in his own life, and that kind of comes through in here. I feel like this guy knows what he's talking about when he writes combat scenes, and so I really appreciate that. And the action scenes are really the hallmark of this series, and they're very well done, of course. And there's a good deal of intrigue in here and some surprises that are very well done. Not something I expected necessarily. Some few twists in here that I definitely did not anticipate. So again, well done. I have a very positive feeling about this book. So Ruin also shows a willingness and a skill, because this takes skill in taking the tropes. I've talked about this book before as being an example of a more modern fantasy that feels a little bit more classic because it uses tropes, but uses them very well. But here in Ruin, I see Gwynne taking these tropes in new directions, which I really appreciate. It's another reason why I found myself liking Ruin even more. So great stuff, and some really interesting directions that he takes this one. And it's not just good versus evil here. You have the introduction of complexity in quite a few of the characters. And you have a willingness to allow the reader to get to know the motives, to get to know the fears of some of the characters that you might have, in the first two books, characterized simply as villains. And particularly the POV characters. So we get some depth added to them that I appreciated very much. And also there are some characters that you might have thought of as purely good. And you have some introduction of some very important nuance in this book to some of these characters. So very well done, something that I definitely appreciated very much in here. These added levels of complexity made some of these characters feel just more compelling to me. So that is great stuff. Also, we have the lines in the God War that are drawn. You have the sides that are taking shape. And it really narrows down in Ruin to a couple very intense fields of action. And all the while, this is maybe not going to sound like the greatest compliment ever, but I consider this to be a tremendous compliment. And I think you'll understand if you've ever tried to write a book. But what I felt with Ruin, and also in the previous two books, there are no awkward narrative moments here. There's no hiccup along the way. Everything just fits very nicely in the plot, and it flows along really well. Another reason why the pace is so good in these books, I think, in addition to just being a lot of action, is the fact that Gwynne doesn't have any serious missteps in here. That is very hard to pull off. Try writing a book if you don't believe me. So that, I just think that Gwynne is a writer who I suspect works very hard at his craft. That is not something that just happens. So again, I think that is very high praise for what John Gwynne is doing here. And as I said, it reads fast like the previous books, and the attachment to the characters continues to grow. And these characters are essentially the heart of this series. And you have to expect, though, that since this is a major conflict going on here, the God War, there are going to be some losses. And I very much respect the fact that John Gwynne is willing to kill off some beloved characters in this series. So that is, it gives a touch of realism. It gives a sense that the stakes are high here. So very much in the way that you would find in A Song of Ice and Fire, for example. No character is necessarily safe. So I really appreciate that about this. Another reason why this feels like a really nice blend of classic fantasy and modern fantasy. So very well done, John Gwynne. And I would like to talk now about those characters. So this is a moment when I wanted to warn you, there could be some spoilers for the first two books for Malice and Valor. So if you haven't read those yet and you've listened this far, it was great seeing you. Thanks for stopping by. And yes, let's talk about these characters because, as I said, they are the heart of this series. So you have, of course, Corbin. Now, I really like the way Corbin has been shaping up throughout the series so far. And he is not a simple, tropey farm boy, becomes chosen one type figure here. There is more to this character. I feel increasingly attached to this character. I love the relationships that Gwynne establishes for him with various other characters, and that is a huge strength, is the primary characters' relationships with the secondary characters done very well. We see Corbin's heroism and his goodness reflected in the people around him, and that helps us to understand his character. I love his relationship with Storm especially. Who doesn't? It's just beautiful. It's really good stuff, and that is certainly a central part of Ruin as well. But you also have his sister, Cohen. I'm going to say, some people might say Cywin, which is perfectly fine. I'm giving it the Welsh pronunciation. She is a character I continue to enjoy as well, and as I said, I love her relationship with Corbin. And Dath and Farrell, his old friends, who provide some much-needed comedic moments in the narrative. And I really love how they are kind of developing in their own ways as well and forming their own relationships in here. So that was kind of fun as well. And of course, you have Gar, who remains the protective, still mentor-type figure, but he also is taking on some of his own personality through some of the things that he suffers in these books. And Brina, a character I love from the very beginning. She also has her little moments in here where she's scolding some of the other characters and being Brina. And then, of course, you have Kraft and the whole band. And Corlin, a character I have come to love even more in this book. She was introduced in the second book, and I liked her then, but I like her even more now, and I love where Gwynne is taking her character. So many that I could talk about. I simply don't have time to talk about them all, but there is Idana, and she is coming into her own as well in some interesting ways. And of course, Camlin, and I love that character, have loved him from the very beginning. The conflict within him is something that I loved, and the way he has developed and formed bonds and become a very important and loyal character. And to see where that has taken him in Ruin is really special. And probably my favorite still, though, remains Mackin, or Mackwin, as some people might say. He is a character who I think Gwynne has done him just right. I love his role in here. I think I found myself cheering out loud, probably the most in his portions of the book. So lots of roller coaster ride there, though. I mean, it's really intense. And Fidele as well. I mean, she's a great character I feel invested in. So many, and of course there's Nathair, who has, I like the way he has developed in Ruin as well. I felt like he was just a bit passive in the previous books, a bit of a dupe. So it's interesting to see his response in this book to what happened in the previous two books. Very interesting to see. And of course there's his friend Veritas. I said I was cheering out loud for Mackin in more moments than others, but I have to say I was really delighted with what Gwynne did with Veritas in this book, in Ruins. So I will say no more, but I loved his arc this time a lot, probably more than I previously did. Yeah, so you have characters, so many. There's the giants. We get to see more of the giants in here, like Baylor and Alcyon. And if there's Laith, a new one who I really enjoyed meeting her. And her relationship, particularly with Cohen, is really cool. And of course, there are the Ben Elim and the Kadoshim, primarily represented by Michael and Calidus, and we learn more about them as well, and that gets pretty interesting in here. So no spoilers though, but you will see, and we get a further glimpse of Azeroth and a better idea of the stakes involved in the God War. So really all around great stuff. And thank you, John Gwynne, for writing a fantastic book. I really enjoyed this one immensely, and I am so pumped. Everyone always says, you're going to want to just keep reading, right? Go straight to Wrath as soon as you finish Ruin, and I definitely see what people are talking about. I'm not going to wait too long. I do have a couple other books I need to read in between, but it won't be too long before I get to Wrath, and I am so looking forward to it. So, yeah, The Faithful and the Fallen continues to impress. Thank you for watching this review. It's always a pleasure to interact with you guys in the comments, and if you feel inspired to, like, and if you haven't subscribed, feel free to do that as well. And I hope you will join me for my next review, and join us for our discussion of Ruin on Abby Salter's channel when that comes out. Until next time.